I chair the the BC Tech CFO Council, and I think it's really important not only is our technology community, but also for our CFO community that we have strength in numbers. And so I noticed that there's a couple of our members of our CFO Council in the audience today. So great to see, and I'd welcome participation. It's similar to technology companies. It's all about collaboration and sharing. And so if there's any questions in the materials or discussion that we have going on today, by all means, send it in the chat and we'd love to address it. I mean, really want to make sure this is impactful and meaningful for you. As Erica said, I mean, I look at the role of CFO and as been with 5 public tech companies and now with Tantalus, and we're a clean tech company that services utilities and helps them monetize their grid to really, transition to the electrification of everything, including electric vehicles and solar panels and, and great opportunities. And I highlight that because, a lot about technology is, we've got a great idea. We've got to build a company, but we need to get capital. We got to get a team. We got to build a solution or product or software. We got to monetize it and get those beachhead customers and then cross that chasm and then build it and scale it. And then do we build or partner through that way? And who do we have on the team? When do we have them? And the CFO is just such a critical teammate and partner to that role. So really looking forward to hearing from Sarah, Caroline, and Catherine, and a collaborative discussion. Maybe with that, I can, first start with Sarah, and you talk about your path. I mean, from CEO to co-CEO and the transition, and maybe some things you'd like to share and hear from the rest of our panelists on that.
Sure, and welcome everybody, and thanks, George. So I began you heard a little bit about my background or my more recent background from Erica. I began my career in accounting, working at Pricewaterhouse, working in the small business group. And in that role, had an opportunity to really get to see an overall business, which for me was a great first start into the industry. From Pricewaterhouse, I moved into more progressive finance roles, leading to ultimately joining Delta Q in 2012 as the CFO. When I joined Delta Q, the company was about 20 million in revenues, and I know Erica mentioned today we're at just over 100 million US. So it's been a very exciting time. So at Delta Q, we're also in the clean tech sector. We design and manufacture battery chargers for electric vehicles in the off-road space, so equipment and recreational vehicles. In a variety of applications globally. So we manufacture globally and sell globally. So the transition from CFO to CEO happened very naturally for me at Delta Q. I worked very closely with the CEO when I joined the company. And the CEO here at the time was one of the co-founders of the business. So product manager by trade, had a great product idea, wanted to build a great BC company, which is why it's exciting to talk about it in this environment, and needed some finance leadership to do that. I know we're going to talk about when to bring in a CFO. So at the time that I was hired by Delta Q, they had just done an equity raise. There was a lot of confusion about the numbers and the business, and I kind of stepped in to provide some insight there. And then after we were acquired, Ken really had put in a lot of years on this business and was ready to go do something different. So he stepped away. And 2 of us just thought it was very logical to move into the CEO role, well supported by our parent company, who's based out of Italy. We can get more into the whys as we drill into some of these questions during today's presentation.
Well, great story and a great summary. So thank you, Sarah. Caroline, maybe I know it's a lot of great experience as well. Look forward to you sharing. Tell us your story.
Well, I think there's, being a bit of color at the outset. I think the only point I would really make is I've been a CFO in technology for 25 years. But germane to our conversation, I think, is I've always held additional portfolios. So, and I think you'll find that when you talk to this group and you hear this group, we've always had additional portfolios, and maybe that'll be useful to draw that out for the audience. So unbeknownst to me, the first decade of my 25-year career, my role was titled the CFO, but I was also the operating de facto COO. I had never operated within a company where there was a COO. So, you're called a CFO. I've held various portfolios concurrent with CFO, like operations, supply chain, HR, legal. The one right now, which has been the most fun, is biochem. Suddenly I'm a biochem expert. Who knew? But I think it's relevant to the fact that the title can belie the functional area, and the breadth of some of what we've had the opportunity to bring to the table from a leadership perspective. So I think in terms of career progression, I would just, sort of leave it at that. In terms of just Semios, Semios is an ag tech company. We're a global ag tech company. We do that to help nature feed a growing population. We do that by being the leading agronomic crop production platform, which, unless you're in agriculture, would probably mean nothing to you. So to put it in some other ways that might mean something a little more resonant, we have 100 million acres under management globally. We have 2 million sensors plus in field, with 520 million data points reporting every 10 minutes, which we believe makes us the largest IoT agricultural company in the world.
Wow. Very impressive stats, and it's great. I mean, if I look at, a lot of us follow our passion, and it's building great businesses, and with, as CFO as well. And we'll talk about really the business impact and the partnership we can be. But, if you're going to solve feeding the world and sustaining the world from a clean tech perspective, I think that is very, gives you a lot of reward intrinsically as well. And as an AI data management company, I love what you're doing as well. And, look forward to hearing Catherine about, who I will give a shout out, was just acknowledged yesterday as one of this is Vancouver's new 40 under 40, recipients. So congratulations, Catherine, and looking forward to hearing about yourself.
Thanks, George. I like Sarah, and I think Caroline, used to work at KPMG, where I saw a lot of I worked in public company audits, a lot of best practices, and then soon moved to enterprise, small owner managed businesses, because I knew that's where I eventually wanted to be. I wanted to run a business. When I joined Global Relay 10 years ago, which is hard to imagine, it's gone by very quickly. We were at less than 250 people, about 30 odd million in revenues. And now we're 1,500 globally, and we should be about 300 million in revenues this year. So huge growth over the time period. When I started, I joined actually as controller, and the company was growing so quickly, but they didn't really had that many CPAs that knew how to help get the house in order after growing so quickly, right? You've got your senior leadership that are all really good in their own areas, but finance is a piece that if you do it wrong, it will cost you a lot in the end. And so my first job really was to try and get things in order, get KPIs, get reporting, get the visibility that the business really needed to make decisions to help them in the long run. And it's really hard to forecast in the beginning when things are changing constantly, and you're trying to make a name for yourself as someone who's trusted. And so the first few years we're just learning about everyone in the business and what their goals were and what the objectives were and how everyone worked and needed information to be presented to them. I think was the most important part, because at the end of the day, they don't know what they need to know. And I think as a CFO, it's your job to help figure out what is pertinent and how to present and get that message across and continue to manage that and report on that on a timely basis, right? Maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think some messages need to be heard, but if you can figure out the right tone and delivery so that the message can be heard in an impactful way and easily understood, I think your chances of success, stand to increase. The department was only 10 people when I joined, maybe even less than that, and we're nearly 40. So, growing your team and when to add the bodies and in what capacity was also a challenge that we've worked through over the last 10 years, and we continue to grow. So I know that we're going to probably dig into that later, but it's been a tremendous experience with Global Relay. We're not finished yet.
No, that's fantastic, and we'll be cheering for you. And the thing I'd say is, and for people in the audience, like Silicon Valley, there's strength in numbers, as I said, and shout out to BC Tech in trying to foster this. But the more successful companies we have that are not just satellite offices, but they're actually building IP and businesses and impacting the world globally from Canada and Vancouver, the better we are. And so, look forward to the success of all of us. And you made some comments there, which are really relevant. I think a lot of us are more multifaceted, having been a CFO and interim CEO roles as well. But I think the basis of that, and Sarah said, oh, it's a seamless transition, but it isn't with Catherine's examples. And, how do you become really the business partner to the business? How do you earn that trust? How do you help identify and say what's relevant, what's not, from a KPI and otherwise, especially when you don't have visibility on things? I know, we all know, in the audience especially, is when you're building a technology company, you are running like that, or maybe you're playing defense for a while, and maybe, one step backward, 2 steps forward. What do you focus on? What do you defer? And how do you wrap your arms around it? And it's so much more than a financial plan. It's really, how do you build an amazing business? And from a CFO perspective, how do they really add strategic? What are you doing? Why it matters and changing the world? Operational, and I think Catherine, you highlight that, and certainly Carolyn, in terms of all the the data metrics that she has in terms of showing scale, into the strong financial management to really be that we got visibility. Where do we invest? Where do we not? And sometimes we let's play more offense. And so with that, I'd like to really hear from our panel. How do you think a CFO and the attributes? Where do you think they add the most value? What do you look at when you look at that role? We'll talk about the timing of a company, and we're all a little bit larger companies, but we all have been in small and started small and scaled, which is great. So why don't we start with Caroline? Why don't you give your perspective on where a CFO adds, the most value?
When we think about range, earlier stage to later stage, and as you say, George, maybe in the audience, there's more earlier stage companies. So, a few years ago, we just raised Series A, and VC. Every board meeting, you would always say the same thing. What's the biggest reason that early stage companies go out of business? And everybody was, because they run out of money. So the key point, simply put, is building a great business. But the key reason that every early stage company, by far the biggest reason they fail, is because they run out of money. And the idea that that's only an early stage company is a fiction. Every company, it's just the way that they can run out of money. We've got some local companies that have just gone into liquidation, big companies. We've had some massive, stories we could tell. And I asked George when we were preparing for this, I happened to be meeting with Sarah and George, and I said, have you ever been part of a company that ran out of money? And they went, well, we've been thrown into companies that were close to running out of money. And I went, no, that was not my question. Have you ever been part of a company that's run out of money? The answer is no, we never have. God willing, it doesn't happen. So that sounds very simple, but the mechanic and the detail of where and how that actually happens really depends on the circumstance. So it's relevant. I'm sure it's still relevant to Catherine. Oh, really? I mean, you could still run out of money. And it's still relevant to that Series A company. And it really depends on the circumstance. So for example, I can share that, at Semios, we cut our cash burn last year by 72%, and we did it without any layoffs. Now that sounds impossible, but it really depends on, if you really understand the business model, you can understand that the levers that you can pull to really actually drive, that runway, etc. So to me, it's about really understanding the business model, the underwriting model of the business, seeing where the levers there are, and it can be in all sorts of places. I mean, one time to really actually reduce cash burn, it turned out it was the way we were doing product releases. I had to take over running operations, then I had to take over running the customer success center, and then I realized it was the code, and then you lean into that. It's wherever it takes you, a successful business partner who really understands operating models, which includes the financial model, knows how to navigate. Okay, that's actually where the problem is. Oh, no, it's over here. Oh, and then you get to the root of the issue, which is where the lever is to be able to torque the business towards where you want to go. So lots of examples, but in principle, I would argue that's what we do.
Yeah, no, it's a great example and summary of, I always like to use the term, get out of the dugout into the field. From finance, because a little bit of baseball term, but more importantly is get plugged in. As Carolyn say, you don't want to just be in a silo. You need, especially as a technology company, you need synergies, you need collaboration. And the more that as CFO operationally, then you can influence what are the levers, what's working, what's not, and what are the options. And by the way, two things, kudos on reducing that cash burn. And I'd love to take a page out of some of your book, which is great, as we all can always do that. But it's not all about cutting expenses. It's about operational efficiencies. And part of that is, where do you invest more to accelerate growth and stuff?
Yeah.
So with that, why don't I throw it to Catherine next to talk about the value the CFO can really add and impact they can make.
Yeah, I mean, I think Carolyn has this amazing example, but it's exactly that. It's rolling up your sleeves and really getting in with all of the other, senior stakeholders at the business to figure out what's holding them back, right? Why aren't they expanding? Why aren't they growing? Why isn't the, can we extract more revenues from our customers, and how can we do that? What's sitting on the table that we haven't tapped, right? And, a couple of years back, we realized, our account management team, where we should be focusing on nurturing customer relationships, figuring out what their needs were, and upselling, and understanding how do we, strengthen our relationship, right? It was really neglected. And so, we were comparing ourselves against other SaaS companies where, a large majority of your net increase in MRR should be coming from within the base that you already have. And so we did a really big investment into our customer success. We rebranded the whole thing. It became customer success, because I think account management just sounded old and not reflective of where that department really needed to go. And through tracking, all the changes in our monthly recurring revenues, compensating the people correctly and giving them the right tools, which is what we're doing right now, to give them the right data to have the right customer conversations, we were really able to dial that up. It was interesting when you talked about, have you ever been in a business that, didn't have money? I know when I started in the early days, yeah, it was a bit scary, right? Making payroll and whatnot. And one of the things I looked into was our AR. Like, why are these metrics not as good as they should be, right? Our terms are net 30 or whatever it may be. Why haven't we contacted these customers? Like, just operational things that, other leadership would have no idea. They're not finance specialists, right? And so getting the right person in there that can actually just analyze what is happening in your books can probably extract a lot of capital that you don't know. It's hiding, right? And then focusing, if you need to be you have to be very careful where you deploy your capital. And is it going to move the dial? Is it going to bring the next customer in, and get you across the hill? And if it's near or short term, like those are decisions that you need to have. And those aren't easy conversations to have, but I think you really need to build the trust within your senior management team that, the information that you have and that you're sharing with them is pertinent, and you're only going to get that through developing and rolling your sleeves up and really getting in there.
No, I love it. And I think you bring up it's teamwork and it's trust and integrity, but a lot of times when you come in and say, listen, we're here to make you more successful, and collaboratively we're all successful. And then you break down the barriers, and really some of those conversations are tough, but if you really come with them constructively in a locker room environment, and you're in the before you go on the field again, in the it's all about everyone anchored the same goals of building a great company, right? So and then as Sarah, I know she's added a lot of value as co-CEO, but let's talk about from your perspective, from a CFO, where do you see the attributes, the value, the impact on the business?
Well, I really want to re-emphasize what both Catherine and Carolyn have talked about, because my experience has been very similar. So a couple of words I've heard from Catherine around trusted, and George, you just said the same thing. So becoming a trusted business partner to the CEO is invaluable. You have to gain that trust because, as you pointed out, George, you sometimes have to deliver difficult messages. And particularly if the CEO is a founder of a company, doesn't really possibly have that finance experience, or even they don't come from business, they come from engineering or what have you. These are areas they're just not familiar about, and sometimes you have to deliver unpopular messages. And so having that trusting relationship and building that, and being partners working through difficult issues, I think is really important. Another theme that we've touched on that really resonated with me and has been my experience is operationally focused. When I first joined Delta Q, we were about a year late on a product delivery. The program wasn't resourced enough, and we were running out of money that had come in from the investors. And but I actually had to go to dig into engineering. I mean, and I am not an engineer, I'm an accountant, but find out what really was happening in the business, and go to the CEO and the board and say, listen, I know we're burning more cash than you would have liked, but if we're going to ever launch this product, we've got to make these investments in these areas, and show them the data, right? And from there, leaning into the sales organization. Once that product was available, like partnering with the go-to-market team, like how do we now accelerate revenues? So it's really about using the numbers to tell the story about the business, like using your finance experience to turn the numbers into the story, and then leaning in to the areas that can have the most impact on the organization. And so you've all mentioned getting out of your office. It's so critical that you're passionate about the business and you want to lean into other areas of the organization to take the insight that you have from your experience on the finance side and partner with the other areas of the business to drive results.
No, it's fantastic. And I think the numbers, it's really about maybe a little bit of a lot of communication and collaboration, but that teamwork and fostering that relationship is not only business partner, I think, with the CEO, which it is, your wing person to that, but also to partner with other teams. I mean, you take a classic example. What's our biggest investment in operating expense in a tech company? It's human capital business, right? We don't even spend on facilities that much anymore because we're all virtual a lot of times. But if you look at that, I know some companies are reticent about a little bit big brother, and it's how you introduce and what you do with it. But even take like time management, so you can allocate what are you doing, both from an R&D and other elements to your operations. Where could you be investing in different areas? And I use that just an example of people could be maybe, and it's a way you do it in terms of what you get out of it and how it impacts the overall organization and functions. But the more relevant data about what you're doing and maybe what you're not doing helps you optimize your success. It's tough enough in the hyper competitive market and technology to be successful. You want to optimize it, when you partner and have the synergies there. And my final comment on this session for our next question, which segues into a couple of questions we've had on, in the chat, is really, I don't think any of you sound like accountants, even though I'm a Deloitte, we have PwC, we got some KPMG. I mean, it's amazing. And that sort of goes into how do you really expand between the platform, obviously being very strong financially and leveraging those skill sets, but really how do you go much more beyond, right? So, very impressive and very interesting. And then we go to the next one is, because I think we do have a lot of earlier stage companies here. And I notice even some of our CFO council members on there that offer, but you sort of look at, when, and I think Carolyn touched upon it and it's relevant, but when do you make the investment? And this is relevant because last mile capital, we got to get that idea into a product, got to get a BJ customer. Do I need a CFO? And then the real question is, can you afford not to have one? And so I asked that question, what are some of maybe the steps that you could use? I mean, there's fractional CFOs, there's the combination of COO, CFO to maybe expand, maybe advisor or director, which is not, as hands-on maybe, but, let's start with Catherine and figure out from your perspective, when you look at an earlier stage company, when do you think, and how do you bring and leverage the skill sets of a real impactful CFO onto the team?
Thanks, George. So I think when I joined, I joined as a controller, and I, worked my way up to be promoted to director of finance, and then CFO. But I essentially was head of finance since 2016, and I think I didn't come in as a CFO. I came on as a controller to help, roll up my sleeves and kind of get things organized and get the house in order. At the same time, learning the business and my colleagues, right? And what they needed from finance as a service department within the company, not just me as controller or whatnot. And I think, it's hard to make those decisions, but I think if you don't feel like you have visibility into what's happening in your business, you have no idea, you're not, comfortable with handling money, or you need help in selling your story and figuring out what that pitch deck is, or you need financing from a bank or whatever it may be. I think, if you can't afford a full-blown CFO, I think hiring someone who is hands-on, who is really eager, who wants to grow with the business and that you can trust, and that can, is ready to cut their teeth and learn and grow with your business. I think that is a really great route to finding someone who could be really successful in your company long term. But it all kind of depends. I think Global Relay is a little bit different, whereas we don't have PE money, right? We're, fully bank financed and owner managed bootstrap in the early days. And I know that was really tough. It predates me, but it was really tough for our founders, but it actually became a great thing because we control our own destiny now, not having that timeline. But I will say, take a chance on someone who, fits your culture, understands, and wants to come along for the ride, but has the technical skill set that, is lacking in the business to maybe do it and have them grow with you. I think that's how I came to be a TR.
No, but there may be some ways for us to also provide a little Ben Kenobi stewardship and mentorship, and that can come in certain ways as well, right? So
100%. And I think when I made the jump from KPMG to Global Relay, like I wouldn't be there without the advisors that I was able to tap on that, I guess could have been viewed as maybe a fractional CFO or whatnot, like advisory services, because, I hadn't seen everything either, but I knew enough about the questions I needed to ask to get the advice when I needed it from someone who really was experienced.
By the way, shout out to our BC CFO Council, and we welcome people to participate and engage, because that's definitely a form of you don't want to be on an island. You want a collaboration, but not only in the finance but through the business. Sarah, what are your thoughts in terms of timing, options, things you've seen work well in terms of early stage companies?
Yeah, I mean, we chatted a bit when we prepped for this call, but the message to everybody here is, really the earlier the better. And Catherine, I love your suggestion around however you get there, getting somebody kind of deeply involved in the business to help the business deliver, whether it's growth or capital raise or whatever it is, just getting that insight into the business and having somebody that can really translate financial statements into understanding the levers is really important. So yeah, I would definitely say earlier than later. At Delta Q, as I mentioned, they did have a CFO in place before I joined. So they'd always had, a senior CFO in the role. Quite early on, I was brought in as a function of the equity raise they had done, to help them understand the business better. So I can't emphasize enough, the earlier the better. They can only support and accelerate the success of the business, and I think.
No, I think it's great, and to throw to Caroline and get her perspective, really add a twist. Okay, you bring them in maybe earlier, and I hope her perspective, I want to steal her thunder, and it's good thunder, by the way. But I really is, how do you find someone good at, and that's a challenge, right? In our environment. But your perspective, Caroline.
Well, a lot of great points have been made. I think, if you're looking at earlier stage companies, there's always that real balance. I think the title is a bit of a problem. The CFO thing, so forget the title for a second.
Yeah.
I'd say to founders on the call, think about it from a competency perspective. If you're running a business, or, no matter what stage of the business it is, what are your core competencies, and what core competencies are you missing? And the danger of the conversation is we talk a lot, we've still anchored quite a bit on what the normal side would be, where, financial and indexing and KPIs and forecasting and things like that. But, there's a question in the chat about, where do we spend our time? And it just caused me to look at my calendar, and I realized, oops, I haven't actually spent any time with the finance team this week, despite the fact that it's year end. I've spent a lot of time with product managers, literally I'm looking at my calendar, reimagined mating disruption. We're looking at our next gen product. The reason we're looking at that from a strategic perspective is, about unit economics and optimizing. But even at the earlier stage, the value proposition can be in addition to the financial management, even the financial perspective. So I would say to a founder, do you have a background in running operations? Is that something you feel comfortable in? Do you know how to run HR? Do you know how to run legal? Do you know how to run, even these are base level things you need out the gate. And if you don't have that competency, you're going to have to get it somewhere. Now, there's a couple of options. You can look at Chief Operating Officer. That role's got a whole thing. It's a very fluid role. It can mean a lot of things. But I think you'll find that there's a lot of experienced CFOs that can carry a lot of those portfolios for you that you may not realize and appreciate. So, Catherine's giving you one entryway, which is, take somebody a little more junior and, they'll grow along with you. Another entryway is, get somebody more experienced that can actually bring a lot more to the table than you might think they would have per the title. And so then it really comes around, what are your core competencies as you founder, I'm talking to the founders, probably they're out there. What are your core competencies? And do you have operational execution competency? If you do, then yeah, Catherine's route might make a bit more sense, where you want to shore up the financial competency. If you don't have some of those operational competencies. So I think about it that way. And then the title, honestly, that's the least, that's the last thing you need to look at, is whether it's a CFO, because I think what you're hearing in this conversation is that there are a group of CFOs out there who carry very broad portfolios and that are probably, it's not known.
I think really relevant stuff in terms of, how do you get the key players there, this is the founder, the CTO, et cetera, in some ways to get above the noise, and so they can focus. There's that question, and thank you, Adrian, who's a member of our CFO council, by the way, a great guy. And how do you get them to focus on the things that matter, ruin the business, and how do you take things, even if they know it, off their plate? And if you have someone good at Catherine and you want to groom, how do you expand that, including IT? But I apologize, Sarah. Let me throw it back to you.
No, I was just going to kind of reemphasize Caroline's point in response to one of the questions is my experience as well as CFO is you're definitely not spending all your time on the financials. You're getting that information, it's foundational, and you're using that information to go partner with the other areas of the business, the other teams in the business, to drive change in any number of areas. I mean, we talked about some of the HR, legal, the more traditional kind of areas where a CFO has had ownership, but also beyond that, sales and marketing, engineering, product management. I mean, you use the financials and what the forecasts and the backward looking results to drive different parts of the business. And so I think it's a really important point. You're not sitting in your office spending your time, overviewing the finance team. That's a part of the job. But it's not the whole job, and it's really much broader. And I think that's a really important point. So Carolyn, thanks for drawing out that question on the side.
Yeah, no, it's great. And then the other one is really, being forward looking.
Yes. Yeah.
FP&A. I mean, I having formerly led the valuation group at Deloitte, I'm a bit of a model junkie, but it's really just because you can do sensitivities, and you don't want to be. There's always changes, in the market and things that come up, but you don't want to be caught off guard, especially if there's things that you really could be plugged in about operationally, unit economics, for example, and other stuff. And yeah, I don't know, Catherine, if you wanted to add anything further about where you're focusing your time relative to the finance function and business and other activities.
I did actually, because as my role has changed through the 10 years I've been here, in the beginning it was focus on the finances, right? Build the trust with the senior leadership team so that they do trust and take into account when I'm telling them about the forecast. You need a couple of years of experience for them to say, okay, actually, you are giving us solid information that we can trust and is vetted and used. And then as we grew, I came further and further and further away from the actual finance and accounting team. Backfilled myself, then hired a director who we just promoted to VP Finance recently. And I've seen my schedule completely change to, just as what Caroline and Sarah said, barely talking to my team at all, now focusing on, the rest of the senior management and external facing, be that customer or, other departments that need my help in running the business. I'm almost CFO second rather than, business person first.
Yeah, no, I concur. I mean, it's funny. I do a lot of the, like I said, forward-looking analysis and interacting with the teams, but my finance team, including my VP, who's strong and great team and great partners. It's really okay, great. That shores up what we expected. That's great. Let's keep that going. But it's all about, being agile going forward. And there's a couple of good questions I'm just going to throw in there. And thank you. I thought Dean with his hand up. I don't know if you have one, Dean, but maybe put one in the chat. But I see Raul, and a shout out to EDC. We have a line a credit with EDC and for $7 million. Great partner for technology companies, as is RBC with Dean. Banquet before, a couple of shout outs. So use these partnerships in our community and network. But Raul, you got a great question here, in terms of how do you find, and it's a segue, and maybe we'll start with Caroline here. Caroline, is it difficult to find really strong CFOs? How do you network? Can you find them in, do you do out of province? Because a lot of stuff is maybe virtual now. Or even out of Canada? I know Raul's from Colombia, so maybe he's working there now, and that's a problem. But the question, anyways, what are your thoughts, Caroline, in terms of helping find? How do you find them? And obviously BC Tech and our CFO Council is a good referral source and recruiters as well.
So thanks, George, because I'm smiling because I actually said, okay, we're going to get these guys all excited about hiring CFOs and how many of them are out there. Do you find it difficult for BC companies to hire CFOs based in BC? It depends on the CFO. So I've just promoted a CFO that is a broad business partner. You could call it CFO/COO. That's a very Silicon Valley loves that model. It's a very cost-effective model for stepping into it.
Yeah.
There aren't a ton of CFOs that actually have that combined experience, which makes that value proposition work. Not as many as I would like to see in BC, which is actually one of the reasons why I have been a chief operating officer for a decade. I've been a chief executive officer, and it's why I've committed myself to being a CFO in this community for the balance of my career, because I don't think there's enough of them. I also think we as BC Tech need to help build them. So I'll set all that aside because that's not helpful to the question. I would say going outside of province would be okay, remote. The US one is interesting, and the only evidence I can bring to bear is there is an astonishing failure rate, I've noticed, of US CFOs coming into earlier stage BC companies. So I'm making no judgment. I just observe the failure rate of it. I can make some guesses as to why that happens, but I don't want to do that because that's not data. The data is there that there is a surprising failure rate of US. Now, if you're going into US markets and you're at that later stage and you're looking forward to NASDAQ, et cetera, but I don't think that's really what we're talking about here. So I think the US thing just doesn't seem to work, and I don't really know why, because it kind of should. I think going out of province would be fine. Going remote would be fine. If you were doing the model that Catherine was talking about, where you're not trying to leverage all of the operational expertise into that ROI, I think you could go outside of province, maybe go into the US. But I think if you're trying to leverage that operational expertise, for example, some of the things that I can bring to bear are, okay, I know exactly how to do a stock option plan. I've done like 8 of them. I know how to transition, leadership. I know how to hire CEOs. I know how to run HR. I've done it. You lose that. So there are good CFOs in the city. There are good CFOs in the province. They're not as many as I would like to see.
Yeah, it's a balance, and I think one of our, mandates or goals for sure as a CFO council is to leverage, the experience of, the panel and groom candidly and nurture at the next generation, and also, just get a bigger pool, because the more talent we have here that's experienced, it can make a real positive impact for business, translates ultimately into business success. And the more successful you have, and even if there's exits, hopefully there's a lot more reinvestment like you see in Silicon Valley, and then you just get a very vibrant community full of talent with that. I'll throw it over to Catherine and Sarah if you just wanted to add your perspective on virtual, non-virtual, out of province, non-province, and some of that question as well. I think it's pretty topical.
Go ahead, Catherine, if you had something to add.
I was going to say, when I went on maternity leave a couple of years ago, I did find it difficult to find someone that could fill, and unfortunately ended up not even being the right fit, and which is even worse, right? But we solved that situation. But I think if they're going to be based remotely, our company is really taking the stance that you need to be where your people are. So if you're going to hire someone remotely, they need to be traveling and meeting your people and establishing that trust. I think it's next impossible to do that remote, just over Zoom or GoToMeeting or whatever it is that you're using. So I think, they need to be on the road in the beginning to really understand what everyone's objectives are, what they need, so that you can make the business successful and help them be successful. So, and I agree with Carolyn, there's not that many here.
Unfortunately, I have the same response, and I was just at a different BC Tech event talking more broadly about the ability to hire skills, right? It's a challenge for the BC community. And I think in terms of virtual or somewhere outside of BC, I mean, it really depends where your core business is. I think new hybrid work makes it a bit more possible, but I also strongly agree with Catherine. Like, you need to be with your people, with your team. And it's just not the same over Zoom, quite honestly.
George, can I just add an extra point here so we leave on a positive?
Absolutely.
So we leave
Thanks,
on a
Jared.
positive note here, okay?
Yeah.
So trying to solve for the problem. You know, there's some good talent. So what I would say to leaders who are trying to find the talent, there's some good talent. Again, look at the competencies. If you feel there's gaps, think about things like, okay, do I want to shore up my board? Do I want to try and get somebody in on my board to help support this developing person? So there's ways for talent to help shore up the talent that you're trying to bring through.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's an excellent point. And by the way, very collaborative group, which I love, and some great ideas. But I'm actually a director and audit committee chair of a public company, and you know, we had a CFO leave, and we had a very strong VP finance that had an opportunity to grow, as Catherine said. And so I tend to mentor a lot in that role, just, you know, and I think there's ways you can do that, you know, as in those other ways too. But you know, plug the network. And the other thing is no substitute, I think, for building relationships. You know, it doesn't have to be all the time, as Sarah said, and hybrid, and you know, but you need to, you know, trust each other and stuff. And you know, I have a final question here. I'm just gonna throw it out just to hear what, you know, can share just generally what you would have, if there's anything that we haven't discussed about, you know, startup technology companies, you know, really, you know, the pitfalls you've seen, the things as they cross the chasm. Maybe you can even throw part of the current 2024 situations where we got a challenging macroeconomics environment, you got increasing competition and almost commoditization and consolidation of technology solutions, making it tougher for smaller companies at times. But at the same time, you need to be nimble, agile. You need to figure out where you invest without being penny smart, pound foolish, and but you got to manage that runway too and that balance sheet. So, you know, why don't I throw Caroline? Why don't you? We'll throw it out, but just one last. If there's anything that comes, you're having coffee with a founder, and you know, watch out for these things, or especially in this environment. Anything else you'd like to add?
Well, to me, you know, it's always good. It's always useful to pay attention to Silicon Valley and what's coming out. One thing that's really struck me is, you know, for the longest time, you know, it was a lot about code, then it was about the product. What's interesting to me now, Silicon Valley, you know, and Andreessen would talk a lot about product marketing. And, you know, what does product marketing really mean? I find I go into a lot of companies that have built a product. It's a great value, you know, they think, oh, this is a really good value proposition. But product marketing is about the match of what the market is willing to bear, the value attribution, the costs that you can, you know, design that for, and whether or not you've actually got a viable long-term business model based on unit economics. And I've used a lot of words there, but really at the forefront of that, and an area that I spent a lot of time in every company I've been in the past is the product marketing's actually been weak at the outset. Yeah. And as I say, if you read some literature about Andreessen, you know, another, you know, Bessemer, they will be really leaning more strongly into the product marketing side. And again, if that word doesn't mean a lot to you as a founder, that's your clue that you might need a business partner who understands the concept of product marketing.
I love it. I'm smiling because one of my challenges is product management not being product marketing, because and it's the classic, and it's almost here we're getting into the business side a little bit in the discussion, but the marketing side, as Caroline has highlighted, it's almost it's what are you doing? Why does it matter? Why is it relevant? And how are you going to scale and validate and sustain yourself and grow? Which is really key in the market. It's also, I find, the handshake between your product development group and your sales commercialization group and marketing group. And really, if you have it externally focused with with business acumen and partnership as a CFO, to that, I think you can really make an impact. And that trend that they're going is, rather than build it, they will come, and add more bodies to really, why are we doing this, and how do we measure it, and be agile to adapt, I think is product marketing. I just love, it's a great example. Catherine, any other thoughts that come?
I'm laughing because I mean, I think like any company at any stage has that issue. How to tell your story, how to get, all of your folks online so that the people that have built it, it can be explained to the right people, arm your salespeople with the right collateral, so that you can actually have a successful launch and everyone's on the same page. And I think that is something that we're also working on right now as we grow in different jurisdictions, at different time zones and different offices.
Mhm.
Like that is, something that I'm intimately involved with right now to, be the conduit through all this. And so it's just interesting, very interesting. So I appreciate Caroline's comments. I don't think I have anything more to add there, though. Maybe Sarah does.
Okay, Sarah?
Actually, I'm going to take my comment right back to basics, and it's don't take your eye off the financials, both looking at the results and forward looking. And we talked about all the different hats we wear, but at the end of the day, when you think about what we've been through the last 3 years, every business on the planet, a pandemic, a supply chain crisis, and now market softness, we wear a number of different hats in our day-to-day jobs to drive the business as much as we can. But at the end of the day, don't take your eye off your cash, off your financial position, and off your forecast, because things happen that are way out of our control, and we need to be able to be agile and respond quickly. Whether it's a pandemic or whatever the next challenge is that's out there for us to face head on. But I think building the right team and having that right business partner can help you get through these kind of challenging environments. And so that would be my advice.
No, it's fantastic because for one thing, it's certainly not boring, but it's but the other side is, it's being able to mitigate risks and proactively, and then also capitalize on opportunities and play offense on that too. So it really is great. So I really want to heartfelt thank our three panelists today, who are just exceptional. And and so thank you, Sarah, Caroline, and Catherine.